I still remember the day my father's voice broke the air like thunder. It wasn't the kind of voice you could ignore. It was sharp, commanding, final, like the sound of a door slamming shut on every dream I had ever held close. "Either you marry him," he had said, his finger stabbing the air like a dagger, "or you are no longer my daughter." Those words were not just words. They were a sentence. A verdict. And I was the criminal who dared to defy him. You see, I wasn't born into a poor family. My father was the kind of man who wore his wealth like armor. He loved to be admired, feared, respected. We lived in a mansion that towered over the smaller houses in our neighborhood, as though it were declaring to the world that our family stood above the rest. Marble floors, grand chandeliers, a driveway lined with luxury cars. That was the world I grew up in. But beneath all that glitter and shine, there was always a shadow. My father's shadow. A man who believed daughters were currency, bargaining chips, tools to forge alliances. And I was his most valuable tool. The man he wanted me to marry was twice my age. Wealthy, yes. Powerful, yes. But he had a cruel reputation. Everyone knew his temper. The way he treated women like ornament. He could polish and display or discard when he grew bored. I had seen the fear in the eyes of the women who stood beside him at parties. They smiled, but their smiles were masks. Masks hiding bruises no one dared to mention. And my father wanted me to be the next mask. That morning, I stood in our grand living room, sunlight spilling through tall glass windows. My mother sat silently in the corner, her hands wringing the edge of her sari. She couldn't meet my eyes. She never could when father was in one of his moods. My younger brother leaned against the wall, smirking, as though he couldn't wait to see me fall. My sister, polished and perfect, wore that expression of pity she had perfected over the years, the kind that wasn't pity at all, but triumph in disguise. And me, I stood barefoot on the cold marble floor, my heart pounding, my palms trembling, but my voice was steady. "No," I told him. Just one word. But it was the loudest word I had ever spoken in my life. For a moment, there was silence. It hung in the air like a fragile piece of glass. And then, it shattered. His hand slammed the table so hard the glasses rattled. "You dare defy me," he roared. "After everything I have given you? You think you have a choice?" I wanted to scream back that yes, I did have a choice. That my life was not his to trade. But my throat closed up. My body shook. Fear had always lived inside me when it came to him. But that day, courage burned too. A small flame, flickering but alive. "I will not marry him," I whispered. But each word was iron. I would rather walk away with nothing than live in a prison dressed in silk. I thought maybe, just maybe, my words might touch something human in him. But my father was not a man moved by humanity. He was a man ruled by pride. "Then get out." His voice cracked like a whip. "You are no longer my daughter. From this day forward, you are dead to this family." The words seared into me. My mother gasped softly but didn't move. My brother laughed under his breath. My sister tilted her head, eyes gleaming, as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. And me, I stood frozen, a storm raging inside me, dead to them. That night, I packed a single bag. Just clothes, a notebook, a little bit of cash I had secretly saved. No jewelry, no inheritance, nothing of the life I had once known. My mother came to my door while I was zipping the bag. She didn't step inside. She just stood there, her silhouette framed in the light of the hallway. Her lips parted as though she wanted to say something, but then she closed them again. And when she turned away, I felt something inside me break. I wanted her to fight for me. Just once. To say no, let her stay. To say she is my daughter. But silence was the only gift she gave me. As I walked out of that house, alone, the night air was cold as I stepped onto the street. The mansion loomed behind me, glowing with warm light, laughter spilling from its windows. My family was inside, living their lives as though I had never existed. And I was just a shadow disappearing into the night. For hours I walked. My shoes pinched my feet, the straps cutting into my skin, but I didn't care. I had nowhere to go. No friends I could trust. No relatives who would risk father's wrath by taking me in. By dawn, exhaustion dragged me to a park bench on the edge of the city. I curled up, clutching my bag, and for the first time, the tears came. They slid down my face silently, soaking into the worn fabric of my dress. I wasn't crying because I was afraid. I was crying because a part of me had died that night. The daughter who wanted her father's approval. The girl who dreamed of her mother's embrace. The sister who longed to be loved, not envied. She was gone, and in her place, something new was being born. That morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky in gold, I made myself a promise. If they wanted me dead to them, then so be it. But one day I would return. Not as their daughter, but as their reckoning. And when that day came, they would learn the price of throwing me away. The first days after my exile blurred together like a storm. I remember hunger before I remember hope. I remember the sting of humiliation before I remember courage. When you grow up in wealth, you don't realize how fragile it is, how quickly it slips through your fingers when you have no name, no protection, no one to call your own. The first night, I slept on that park bench, clutching my bag like a lifeline. By morning, my body ached from the cold, and my pride had been stripped raw. People passed me by, joggers, workers, couples holding hands, and I wondered if they saw me, or if I had already become invisible. My stomach growled, and I clutched it as though I could quiet it with my hands. I had a little money, but not enough to last more than a week. I couldn't afford to waste even a single coin. So I began to look for work. But work doesn't come easily to a girl with no experience, no references, and no family name. The first shop I entered, the owner glanced at me once and shook his head. "We don't need anyone," he muttered, his eyes already drifting past me to the next customer. The second place. The third place. The 10th. The answer was the same. Sometimes it was polite. Sometimes it was cruel. Sometimes they didn't even bother to look at me before saying no. By the third day, my pride was gone. Hunger gnawed at me so fiercely that I accepted a dishwashing job at a roadside restaurant. The pay was a handful of coins, the hours endless, and the work backbreaking. My soft hands blistered from scrubbing greasy pans. My back screamed from bending over sinks filled with cold, dirty water. The smell clung to me, the stench of oil and rot, and I hated it. But I endured. Each night, when the restaurant closed, I dragged myself back to the park bench. Some nights, I was lucky enough to find a corner of the railway station to curl up in. Other nights, the bench was all I had. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. I told myself I would survive. Just survive. One day at a time. But survival comes with its own cruelties. I learned what it felt like to be cheated. To be promised pay at the end of the week, only to be told I was too slow. that my work wasn't good enough, and sent away empty-handed. I learned what it felt like to be used, to be offered shelter by a stranger, only to realize the price of that roof over my head was far too steep for my dignity to bear. I learned what it felt like to be utterly alone, to watch families laughing in restaurants where I washed dishes, knowing my own family sat at tables like those eating, laughing, living while I scrubbed the plates of strangers. But I also learned something else. I learned that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. Every insult hardened me. Every betrayal sharpened me. Every hunger pang carved away the weakness I had once carried inside me. There were moments I thought I would break. Moments when the weight of it all pressed so heavily on my chest that I wanted to lie down and never rise again. But in those moments, I remembered my father's voice. You are no longer my daughter. From this day forward, you are dead to this family. And I whispered back into the darkness. No, I am not dead. I am becoming something else. Months passed before I found steady work. A small printing shop took me in. The owner, an old man with tired eyes, gave me a chance when no one else would. I swept floors, delivered papers, and made tea. The pay was meager, but it was steady. With every coin I saved, I felt a spark of possibility. I bought books from street vendors, old, tattered business manuals, self-help guides, anything that spoke of survival and success. At night, under the dim light of the printing shop's storeroom, I read until my eyes burned. I learned words I had never heard before. Words about profit, about strategy, about resilience. The books became my new family. The pages became my mentors. Sometimes the old man would catch me reading long after work was done. Instead of scolding me, he would smile faintly and say, "Keep reading, girl. Knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you." And so I did. Slowly, painfully, I began to climb. I started tutoring children in the neighborhood, just a few hours here and there. The coins added up. I stopped sleeping on benches and rented a small room with a single window and a thin mattress. To anyone else, it would have looked like a cage. But to me, it was freedom. My own space. My own roof. There were still setbacks, betrayals. Even as I began to dream bigger, people tried to drag me back down. Men who thought a poor girl was easy prey. Employers who thought they could steal my work without paying. Neighbors who sneered at me because they knew where I came from. What I had lost, but I no longer broke beneath it. I had learned to bend, to endure, to rise again. I carried every insult, every slight, like stones in my pocket. Heavy, yes, but also powerful. For one day, I knew I would throw those stones back, not with hatred, but with the force of everything I had built. I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing for the day when the daughter they had exiled would return, not as a beggar, not as a shadow, but as a storm they would never forget. The years that followed were not easy. Nothing about them was glamorous. Nothing about them felt like destiny. They were made of sweat, failure, and countless nights where I questioned whether I had made a mistake by defying my father. But slowly, through cracks of hardship, the light began to shine. It began with a simple idea. The printing shop, where I still worked part-time. I noticed something. Customers often asked for more than just papers. They wanted invitations designed, flyers for their shops, menus for their restaurants. And while the old man had the machines to print, he didn't have the vision to design. But I had been teaching myself. With borrowed books and hours spent sketching by candlelight, I learned layouts, colors, fonts, the basics of what made something eye-catching. something persuasive. One day, when a customer came in asking for a wedding invitation, I took a risk. I could design it for you, I said softly, my voice trembling. Not just print design. Something different. Something people will remember. The old man frowned at me, skeptical. The customer hesitated. But I pushed past my fear. Let me show you, I insisted. If you don't like it, you don't pay. That night, I worked until dawn. My hands cramped. My eyes ached. But when I slid the sketch across the counter the next morning, something changed. The customer's eyes lit up. This, he whispered, running his finger along the design. This is beautiful. It wasn't just approval. It was validation. For the first time, my creativity had value. Word spread. Slowly at first. A shop owner wanted a flyer. A small restaurant wanted a menu. Each job was small, the pay almost laughable. But every coin went into a jar. Every success fed the fire inside me. I stopped being just the girl who washed dishes, or the girl who swept floors. I became the girl who created, the girl who built. But success attracts shadows. A rival shopkeeper noticed the attention I was gaining. He began to spread rumors that my work was stolen, that I was cheating customers, that I wasn't trustworthy. Some believed him. Some didn't. I lost clients. My earnings slipped. For a moment, I felt the familiar sting of despair. But I had learned something by then. When doors close, windows appear. And so I stopped waiting for customers to find me. Instead, I went to them. I knocked on shop doors. I handed out samples. I told them I could help their businesses stand out, grow, succeed. Some laughed in my face. Some slammed doors. But some listened, and those few were enough. My designs grew bolder. My confidence grew stronger. And one day, I made a decision that terrified me. I left the printing shop. The old man had grown fond of me, and part of me wanted to stay in the safety of his quiet store. But I knew if I stayed, I would never fly. I rented a tiny space barely more than a corner in a crumbling building. The walls were cracked, the ceiling leaked, but it was mine. I painted the door myself, a bright color that stood out from the gray around it. And above it, with the little money I had left, I hung a sign. New Dawn Designs. It wasn't just a name. It was a promise. To myself. To my future. The first year was brutal. Some days I couldn't pay the rent. Some nights I went hungry. I worked until my body shook from exhaustion, chasing every small opportunity. But each project made me better, stronger, smarter, and slowly the tide began to turn. A restaurant saw their sales rise after using my menus. A shop gained new customers from my flyers. Word spread. Small businesses began to trust me. And then came the turning point. A large event company, one of the most respected in the city, approached me for a design campaign. It was more money than I had ever seen. More responsibility than I had ever carried. I wanted to say yes immediately. But fear held me back. What if I fail? I whispered to myself that night. What if I'm not ready? But then I remembered the girl on the park bench. Hungry, alone, rejected, and I realized I had already faced the worst. Failure couldn't destroy me. Fear couldn't break me. So I said yes. For weeks, I barely slept. I poured my entire soul into the project. And when the campaign launched, it was a success beyond anything I had imagined. The company praised my vision. My name began to mean something in business circles. And with that one success, doors began to open. Bigger clients, better projects, more opportunities. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Money began to flow in. Not in floods at first, but in steady streams. I hired 2 assistants, then 4. I moved into a larger office, bought better equipment, dressed not in rags, but in clothes that spoke of quiet power. I still remembered every night of hunger, every insult, every betrayal. They were etched into me like scars. But instead of holding me down, they pushed me higher. And one night, as I stood in my new office high above the streets I once slept on, I looked out at the city lights and whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." What I didn't know then was that fate was already turning. That soon, the same family who had thrown me away would be the ones knocking at my door. And when they did, they would not find the broken daughter they exiled. They would find the woman they had created, the woman who would one day bring them to their knees. It had been 12 years since I last walked those streets. 12 long years since the night I was thrown out with nothing but a bag and a broken heart. But as the car glided through the city, sleek and black, the leather seats hugging me like a throne, I barely recognized the girl who had once cried herself to sleep on park benches. That girl was gone. In her place sat a woman who had built an empire with her own hands. My company was no longer just new dawn designs. It had grown, multiplied, expanded. We had branches across cities. Our campaigns defined markets. My name was whispered in boardrooms, and I was no longer simply surviving. I was leading. The driver slowed as we approached the gates. The mansion stood tall, just as it had in my memories. Its walls gleamed with wealth, its gardens manicured to perfection. But where once I had seen a fortress, now I saw a prison. That house had been my cage. That house had been my grave. I stepped out of the car, my heels clicking against the stone driveway. A sound that was sharp, deliberate, powerful. The sound of a woman who had returned. The guards stared at me, uncertain. For a moment, they didn't recognize me. My clothes were tailored, my hair sleek, my presence commanding. I was no longer the frightened daughter. I was someone else entirely, and then recognition flickered in their eyes. Shock, confusion, fear. I smiled. A slow, controlled smile. "Tell my father," I said, "that his daughter has come home." They hesitated, but no one dared refuse. Inside, the mansion was the same. The grand chandelier, the marble floors, the heavy scent of expensive perfumes. But beneath it all, there was something different. Decay. The air of triumph that once hung in this house was gone. I saw cracks not in the walls, but in the people. The servants moved with nervous energy. The furniture looked worn. The sparkle of wealth remained, but it was thin, a mask stretched over rot. And then I saw them, my family. They were gathered in the sitting room, arguing in hushed, frantic voices. My brother's face was pale, his arrogance replaced with lines of worry. My sister clutched a glass too tightly, her hands trembling. My mother looked older, more fragile, her eyes hollow, and my father was not the giant who had once cast me out. He was smaller now, his shoulders hunched, his hair streaked with gray. His voice was still sharp, but it carried desperation more than command. They were talking about money, about debts, about a company on the brink of collapse. I waited until their words faded, until the silence settled. Then I stepped forward. The sound of my heels broke their world apart. My mother looked up first. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought I saw something: guilt, sorrow, maybe even love. But it flickered away. My sister's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. My brother stood, his jaw dropping, and my father froze. His eyes locked on mine. For a heartbeat, he didn't recognize me. And then realization struck. His face turned pale. "You," he whispered. I let the silence linger before I spoke. My voice was calm, deliberate, sharp enough to cut. "Yes, me." I walked into that room, uninvited, unafraid. Every eye followed me. Every breath caught. I said softly, "that your empire is crumbling." Their shock was palpable. My father's hands clenched in two fists. My brother's face flushed with humiliation. My sister looked away, but I stood tall, my presence filling the room. "You told me I was dead to this family," I said. "But it seems the dead don't stay buried. Sometimes they return stronger than the living." My father rose slowly, his voice trembling with fury. "You dare come back here? After what you did?" "What I did?" I laughed, not bitterly, but coldly. "You mean refusing to be sold into a marriage? Choosing my freedom over your pride?" His face twisted. My brother muttered something under his breath. My sister's lips quivered, and my mother. She whispered my name. Just once. Softly. Like a prayer she had long forgotten. I turned my gaze on her, and for a moment, my armor cracked. I wanted to reach for her, to ask her why she hadn't fought for me. But then I remembered the silence that night. The way she had stood in the doorway and turned away. And I couldn't let weakness show. "Not now, daughters." I looked back at my father. "I didn't come here for your forgiveness," I said. "And I don't want your acceptance. I came here for one reason only." They leaned in, waiting, dreading to watch you realize that the daughter you cast out now holds the power you so desperately need. And in that moment, the room shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one standing small, afraid, begging for scraps of love. For the first time, they were the ones who felt powerless, and I was only just beginning. Revenge doesn't arrive like thunder. It doesn't scream. It doesn't roar. True revenge arrives like a whisper, quiet, patient, invisible until it is too late. That night, after walking out of my family's house, I sat in the back of my car, staring at the mansion through the tinted glass. Once, that house had been my cage. Now, it was a crumbling fortress, filled with desperate people clinging to fading power, and I held the keys to their ruin. Because what they didn't know, what they could never have imagined, was that I already owned them. For years, while they lived in comfort, I had been watching, waiting. My company had grown not just in size but in influence. I had acquired shares, properties, debts, sometimes under my own name, often through silent partners, hidden companies, and clever disguises. Piece by piece, I had been building a quiet empire behind the curtain, and now, the curtain was about to fall. The next morning, news spread across the business world. A major investment firm had taken control of my father's company's largest debt. The creditors they had been ignoring for months, no longer faceless strangers. They belonged to me. When my brother walked into his office that morning, he found lawyers waiting. Cold, efficient men with papers that stripped him of his illusions. When my sister tried to withdraw money from her accounts, she discovered they had been frozen. Her jewels, her comforts, her lifelines all tied up in knots of legality she couldn't untangle. And when my father arrived at his boardroom, he found me already there, sitting at the head of the table. "Good morning," I said softly, as though I hadn't stolen the ground from beneath their feet. The board members looked nervous. Some whispered my name. They knew who I was. They knew what I had built. My father's face was red with fury. "You dare?" I raised a hand, silencing him. "You don't command me anymore," I said. "Not here. Not now. This table doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the shareholders." And I leaned forward, my voice sharp as glass. "And the majority shareholder." The silence that followed was heavy, crushing. He tried to fight, of course. He raised his voice, pounded the table, threatened legal action. But every path he tried to take, I had already sealed. Every move he attempted, I had anticipated. I wasn't the helpless girl who had once whispered no in fear. I was the woman who had learned to play the very game he thought he had mastered. And I was winning. My brother crumbled fast. He begged, pleaded, offered deals. I reminded him of the years he had mocked me, laughed as I left with nothing. His face burned with shame. My sister tried next. She cried, tried to appeal to sisterhood, to blood. But I remembered her smirk that night, the way she had looked at me as though my exile was her triumph. "No," I told her coldly. "Blood doesn't excuse betrayal, and my mother." She didn't speak in that boardroom. But when I met her eyes, I saw tears. Not of anger, not of pride, but of something else. Something I couldn't yet name. Finally, my father. He stood, shaking with rage, his voice cracking. "You ungrateful child. I gave you life, and this is how you repay me." I rose to meet him. For the first time in my life, I looked him in the eyes without fear. "No," I said softly. "You didn't give me life. You tried to take it away. You tried to bury me. But you forgot one thing, father," he sneered, spitting the word. "And what's that?" I smiled. A calm, deliberate smile. "You cannot bury a seed and expect it to die. Sometimes it grows into something stronger, something you can never control." His face crumpled, not with rage, but with something far worse, realization. He knew he had lost, and in that moment, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt power, cold, sharp, unshakable power. The power of a woman who had been exiled, and had returned not for forgiveness, but for victory. Revenge is never a straight line. It bends, it twists, it reveals truths you never saw coming. After that boardroom battle, I walked out victorious. My family's empire was mine, their power reduced to ashes in my hands. But what they didn't know was that I had saved the cruelest twist for last, because this wasn't just about money. It was never only about taking what they had. It was about the past. About the moment everything had started, the night I refused the arranged marriage that led to my exile. That man. That proposal. That choice. For years, I had buried the memory of him, the son of a wealthy ally my father had tried to force me to marry. He was supposed to be my chain, my prison. When I said no, I lost everything. But here's the truth no one expected. He had said no too. Not out of kindness. Not out of love. Out of ambition. He wanted more than a bride forced into his arms. He wanted an empire. He wanted power. And he found it in me. Yes. The very man they thought would be my captor had become my partner. The world knew him as the head of one of the fastest growing global corporations. But behind the curtains, behind the contracts and the deals, he and I had built it together, secretly, quietly, ruthlessly. When I had nothing, he had offered me opportunity, not marriage, not chains, but a seat at the table of power. Together, we created alliances. Together, we bought debts. Together, we tore through markets like a storm. He never asked me to be silent. He never asked me to obey. He asked me to lead, and I did. So, when my father stood trembling in that boardroom, what he didn't yet know was that I wasn't alone. A second door opened. Footsteps echoed, and there he was, the man they had once tried to tie me to, not as my husband, but as my equal. The board gasped. My father staggered back, recognition dawning like thunderclouds in his eyes. You. He choked out. The man smiled, calm and dangerous. Hello, old friend. And then he took his place. Not beside me as my shadow, but across from me as my ally. Together, we revealed the final blow, the merger, my empire, his empire, combined into a single unstoppable force, a force that swallowed my father's company whole. The papers were already signed, the deals already closed. By the time my family realized what had happened, it was too late. I hadn't just taken their company, I had erased their legacy, folded it into mine, and the man they thought was their greatest ally. He had chosen me. I didn't marry him. I didn't give him my name. But together, we had built something far stronger than any forced union, and that was the twist no one saw coming, the marriage they had demanded all those years ago. I had turned it into a partnership of power on my terms, and in doing so, I didn't just win. I rewrote the ending of their story. Victory is never quiet. When empires fall, the world watches. The morning after the boardroom, the newspapers carried my name across their front pages. The exiled daughter returns as powerhouse. Family dynasty collapses overnight. My face, once forgotten, was now everywhere. In every corner of society, whispers turned to gasps. The woman they had dismissed, mocked, erased had come back with fire in her hands, and my family. They became a spectacle. At charity galas, where my sister once stood in gowns worth more than some people's homes, people now turned away, whispering behind their fans. Her credit lines vanished. Her jewels were repossessed. The friends who once clung to her for status now disappeared like smoke. My brother fared worse. His investments, fueled by arrogance rather than strategy, collapsed under scrutiny. The luxury cars, the private parties, the shallow circles of admiration all gone. In their place, creditors, lawsuits and humiliation. And my father faced the deepest cut of all. Once a man whose voice commanded rooms, who believed his word was law, he now found himself ignored. Board members distanced themselves. Allies vanished. He was a relic, a king stripped of his crown, wandering through a world that no longer feared him. I should have felt satisfied. I should have felt joy, but instead I felt something heavier. Because while society laughed at their downfall, I remembered the girl I had been humiliated, alone, cast aside by the very same people now pointing fingers at my family. And though I despised what my family had done to me, I couldn't deny one truth: public humiliation cuts deeper than exile. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, I watched the city lights flicker. The man who had once been my would-be husband joined me. "You've won," he said simply. "Have I?" I asked. My voice was steady, but inside, I felt a strange ache. He studied me. "You've taken everything back. More than back, you've taken everything from them. But the question isn't what you've gained. It's what you want now." I turned away, staring at the night sky. What did I want? To see them crawl? To hear them beg? Or to finally let go? Because revenge had given me power. But it hadn't erased the years of pain. It hadn't filled the emptiness of being unwanted, unloved, unseen. The fallout was in motion. My family was crumbling in public. Society was cheering my name. But inside, I knew the story wasn't finished, not yet, because power isn't the same as peace, and peace was something I had never known. Revenge can silence the world, but it cannot silence the heart. For weeks, I had avoided her. My father, my brother, my sister, I had faced them all with steel in my voice. But my mother, I couldn't. Not yet, because she wasn't just another enemy. She was the ghost in my memories, the woman who had watched as I was cast out, her lips pressed shut, her hands folded, her silence louder than any slap. Her silence had betrayed me most of all. But the time came when avoiding her was no longer possible. She sent a message. Not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. Just a handwritten note delivered to my office. Come home. Just once. Alone, the word home burned on the page. It wasn't my home anymore. But still, I went. That night, I stepped into the mansion I had once been dragged out of. The walls felt smaller, the air heavier. Time had stained everything with decay, the carpets worn, the chandeliers dimmer, the echoes of grandeur fading into dust. She was waiting in the sitting room, dressed not in jewels, not in finery, but in simple grey. Her hair streaked with white, her eyes hollow with years of silence. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, "Why now?" My voice cracked despite my resolve. "Why call me back now, when you said nothing then?" Her hands trembled in her lap. "Do you think I wanted it?" she whispered. "Do you think I wanted my daughter thrown into the street like a stranger? Then why didn't you stop him?" My words were sharp, trembling with the weight of years. "You were my mother. You were supposed to protect me." Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head. "You don't understand. I couldn't. I wasn't as free as you think. Everything I had, everything I was, it was tied to him. I was no queen in this house. I was a prisoner too." Her words cut through me like ice. For so long, I had painted her as the silent accomplice, the mother who chose pride over love. But looking at her now, frail and broken, I saw something else. Another victim, not of exile, but of obedience. "I stayed silent," she whispered, "because I thought silence would keep you safe. I thought if you left quietly, he wouldn't hurt you more. I thought you would find a life away from us, away from him. And you did." Her voice cracked. "You did what I never could." The room fell into silence. My heart pounded. I wanted to scream. I wanted to forgive. I wanted to do both and neither. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me for years. "Did you love me, truly, even when you let him exile me?" Her answer was not loud, not strong, but it was honest. "Every day," she whispered. "And every day since. I have hated myself for the moment I stayed silent. I closed my eyes, fighting the storm inside me. Revenge had broken my father. It had shattered my siblings. But standing in front of my mother, I realized it could not heal the wound of a daughter craving love. This confrontation wasn't about power. It was about truth. And truth was the only thing sharp enough to cut the chains of the past. Silence is heavy. But secrets can crush. After my mother's confession, the room felt suffocating. I wanted to leave, to escape before her words carved any deeper into me. But then, her trembling hand reached out, clutching mine with surprising strength. "There's something you don't know," she whispered. My pulse quickened. What could you possibly say that would change anything now? Her eyes, wet with regret, locked onto mine. The marriage. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about power. There was more. Something your father swore me to silence over. My chest tightened. What are you talking about? She hesitated, her lips trembling, as though speaking the truth might burn her alive. And then she said it. He was protecting himself. The words hung in the air like poison. I pulled back, confused, angry. Protecting himself from what? From me. She shook her head. From exposure. That man, he wanted you to marry his family. They knew things. Dangerous things. Your father had made deals, hidden debts, betrayals that could have destroyed him. Marrying you off wasn't about your future. It was about his survival. The ground beneath me shifted. My exile, my suffering, had never truly been about me. It had been about him. He would have traded your freedom, my mother whispered, to buy their silence, to save his empire. And when you refused, he panicked. He chose to exile you, not because you shamed him, but because you threatened to expose him by existing outside his control. The revelation crashed into me like thunder. All those years, I had thought I was cast out for disobedience, for saying no to a marriage. But the truth was far uglier. I had been sacrificed to cover his sins. The rage inside me surged. So all those years, I said slowly, my voice shaking, I blamed myself. I thought I was weak, stubborn, wrong. But it was never me. It was him. Always him. My mother nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Yes, and I was too afraid to tell you. Too afraid he would destroy us both. The weight of her words nearly crushed me. But then, like steel forged in fire, something inside me hardened. My revenge had stripped him of power, of wealth, of legacy. But this was the truth that would strip him of dignity, because nothing destroys a tyrant more than exposure. That night, I walked out of the mansion not just with victory, but with a weapon far sharper than money, the truth. And I knew what I had to do next. It was time the world learned who my father truly was. Power and truth are the sharpest weapons. By the time I stepped into the press room, cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and the world waited. My father's empire had been dismantled piece by piece. But what I held now was far more devastating. Undeniable proof of his corruption, his betrayals, and his attempts to manipulate, silence, and control. For years, I had walked in shadows, endured hunger, humiliation, and exile. But the world had never seen the full story. Today they would. I stepped to the podium, my heels clicking with the same authority I had once only dreamed of possessing. I looked into the sea of faces, the eyes hungry for scandal, for the truth, for drama. I am the daughter you tried to erase, I began, my voice calm, measured, unwavering. I was cast out for refusing to obey. But I did not vanish. I survived. I built. I learned. And today, the truth is here. I laid the documents on the table. Proof of secret debts, of hidden deals, of manipulation that had protected him while sacrificing me. The reporters gasped. Cameras clicked. Phones lit up with headlines ready to go viral. And yet, I continued, my eyes lifting, scanning the room. This isn't about hatred. This is about justice. About reclaiming what was stolen. About ensuring no one else suffers because of greed or pride. Every word landed with precision. Every pause, deliberate. By the end of the day, my father's reputation was in ruins. My siblings' influence was gone. But I felt something unexpected: peace. Not because they suffered, but because I had reclaimed my story. I had defined my own life. Later that evening, I returned to my penthouse. The man who had once been my would-be husband, now my equal and partner, waited. You did it, he said softly. Yes, I replied, looking out over the city. The lights twinkled below like a million stories, and mine had finally found its voice. And now? He asked. I smiled, a calm, radiant smile. Now, I live. Not for revenge. Not for validation. But for me. That night, I understood the truth of power. It is not measured in money or influence. It is measured in freedom. Freedom to choose, freedom to speak, freedom to be unafraid. I had returned as the exiled daughter. I had destroyed the walls that once confined me. And in doing so, I had finally claimed my life. The past no longer had power over me. The scars remained, yes, but they were proof not of weakness, but of strength. And as the city lights shimmered beneath me, I whispered to the woman I had once been, the girl on the park bench, you survived. You rose. You returned. And now, you are unstoppable. That's all for today, folks. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.